I'd like to now move ahead and introduce to you one of my new favorite people. And his name, I say new favorite people because I've only known him a little while. But his name is Ray Judah. And he's best known as a former Lee County Commissioner. Ray holds a Master of Science degree in Natural Resources and a Bachelor's in Zoology. He remains and serves as a strong advocate for providing a balance between responsible growth and wise stewardship of our precious natural resources. Ray has championed many government programs to preserve and protect our critical water resources, and because of Commissioner Judah's efforts to safeguard the environment over the years, he has received many awards and recognitions, far too numerous to mention here. He's a strong proponent of volunteer service to the community, and he's traveled here from Lee County to be with us today. 5 minutes of listening to Ray Judah has helped me open my eyes to what needs to be accomplished locally and in our state, and inspired me to greater service on behalf of the land and water that we share. And Ray currently serves as the coordinator for the Florida Coastal and Ocean Coalition. Please help me welcome Ray Judah. We've got a band.
Thank you, Julia. Good afternoon, everyone. 24 years as a county commissioner. When I first took office in 1988, I was 6 feet 6 inches tall. Julia is a genuine soul, and I want to thank her so much for the invitation. I also want to thank my colleagues, John and Ruth Scott. They are in the back room there. They've been the champions of the Clean Water Declaration, along with Chris Costello and so many fine staff and volunteers with the Sierra Club. And they're in the back. And for those of you who have not signed the declaration, please feel free to do so. It's basically a Clean Water Bill of Rights. You know, I'm not going to ask you, first of all, for a response to two of probably the most important questions that I could ask you. One is, are you registered to vote? And two, will you vote this election cycle? I hope the answer is yes in both cases. If there's one thing that's working with our governor and the legislature, it's that they have created tremendous deception with regards to how we are managing our water resources. And I can give you a microcosm of that, although we're hearing about the dreadful work or lack thereof throughout this state, whether it's Apalachicola or the Springs or the estuaries on the east and west coast of South Florida or the Everglades, but primarily with regards to Lake Okeechobee, where the state South Florida Water Management District have treated that lake like a reservoir for agricultural runoff rather than as a living ecosystem. And on the estuaries on the east and west coast of South Florida, we have sustained tremendous damage. You all know from the information you've read in the papers and the stories about the die-off of pelicans, dolphins, manatee, grass beds, the algae blooms, the red tide, the fish kills. And it's no secret that the chemical waste and the nutrients from the surrounding agricultural land of the lake eventually discharging into that lake and then off to the Caloosahatchee to the west coast and the St. Lucie over to the east coast in Indian River Lagoon has been the culprit. But what really is frustrating for me personally is that deception I was speaking of. And all you have to understand is, looking at the water budget for Lake Okeechobee, you well recognize that when the governor is out there talking about how he's throwing money at what he thinks are the solutions to the problem, and these water resource projects are going to address either the massive releases from Lake Okeechobee or the fact that we need at sometimes minimum flows to the west coast, these projects don't even come close to addressing these problems. And I can just give you a snapshot. With Lake Okeechobee, on an average year, 1.4 million acre feet of water go to tide, either to the east or west coast. About 1 million acre feet of that go to the west coast, because the Caloosahatchee has a much broader cross-sectional volume. And what you also need to understand is, during these wet rainy seasons, like in 2013 and 2005, we have 2 million acre feet of water. We're talking about 800 billion gallons of water that are wasted, precious water resources going to tide. Then when you look at the water resource projects that the governor and the legislature are referring to, you recognize that with C-43, the reservoir on the west coast, that is supposedly going to be able to address the effects and to alleviate the massive discharge of water from the lake to the west coast, that's only 170,000 acre feet, 55 billion gallons of water. And when you consider that the flow from Moorhaven Lock, from the lake down to the west, down the Clusachy River, provides for 9,300 cubic feet per second, which equates to about 6 billion gallons of water a day, you can understand that C-43 reservoir, to the tune of $500 million as a capital improvement project, is only going to contain enough water for about 9 days. And here we had 4 months of incredible wet rainy season. Again, the incredible amount of volume of water. This C-43 reservoir will not only not provide for enough storage, but it also doesn't have a water quality component. The C-44 reservoir on the east coast that you may have read about is not even going to handle water being released from Lake Okeechobee. It only provides for drainage for the agricultural lands surrounding that proposed C-44 site that's currently under construction. And then the governor has talked about funding for CEP, the Central Everglades Planning Project, which will actually help improve water flow underneath the Tamiami Trail with another 2.6 miles of bridging on the Tamiami Trail. And that's all great, that water can now flow under the Tamiami Trail, but you got to get the water from the lake to the bridge. And therein lies the problem. So we have lack of storage that has to be addressed. In fact, with all these water resource projects under the Comprehensive Everglades Restoration Program, which I know, I think Dr. Knight had talked about, might be about a $30 billion or $20 billion hit to the taxpayers for all these water resource projects to deal with restoring the Everglades and addressing the problems with the impact of the estuaries. We're talking about less than half of the necessary storage to deal with all that stormwater runoff from Lake Okeechobee. So that's why I'm talking about deception from the governor and the legislature. What we need is an actual solution, and that's to restore the historic flow from the lake to the Everglades. And what I have here, and you're welcome to look at it at some point in time later today, is to provide for a flowway in the Everglades agricultural area. This is not going to undermine or subvert agricultural operations, but it's going to provide for a flowway. We only need 50,000 acres to be able to provide for that flowway, so we can now provide sufficient land for storage, treatment, and flow to the south of the Everglades. If that isn't bad enough with regards to what the legislation and the governor have to pursue with regards to funding for this legislative session, one final point, and this is what's really insidious, is that we have over 50% of our waterways that are impaired to drinking, swimming, and fishing. And yet what the Department of Environmental Protection now is charged with doing is, instead of cleaning up and restoring and protecting these water resources, they are now changing the rules of the game. They are actually increasing the data sufficiency requirements to determine what is impaired. And so the parameters that we once were familiar with regards to dissolved oxygen and nutrients is now all going to be changed. The galling part about all this is that the state is not providing the resources or the personnel to provide the data collection. And so I would submit to you that it is this deception that needs to be squelched. And it's going to require that all of us get fully engaged from an environmental standpoint, from an economic standpoint, and most importantly from a political standpoint. I appreciate your attention. These speakers have been wonderful, and I look forward to the rest of the session. Thank you.
Thank you, Ray. Thank you very much. Again, I told you, 5 minutes of listening to Ray. We're going to